The small-town courthouse sat at the edge of Main Street, its brick facade glowing softly in the morning sun. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation, though no one could quite explain why. For a routine case, the room seemed unusually crowded. Reporters had lined the edges, their cameras aimed at the polished wooden benches. Families whispered nervously, shuffling papers and adjusting chairs. The faint hum of air conditioning mingled with the rustle of legal documents. In one corner, a line of police officers stood at attention, the sunlight reflecting off their badges, gleaming like tiny stars against their crisp uniforms. Among the spectators sat a young mother, Sarah, cradling her 3-year-old daughter, Lily, in her lap. Lily clutched a small, worn stuffed bear, her wide brown eyes darting around the courtroom, as if she were taking in every detail for a secret reason. Sarah tried to keep her calm, but Lily's attention wandered constantly, her tiny fingers twitching and pointing whenever something caught her curiosity. Despite being only 3, she seemed unusually alert, absorbing everything around her, the murmur of the crowd, the subtle tension in the air, the occasional creak of the wooden floor as someone shifted their weight. At the front of the courtroom, Rex, the police dog, sat obediently beside his handler. His fur was a glossy mix of brown and black, and his eyes scanned the room with quiet intelligence. Rex was more than just a demonstration dog. He had served the department for several years, participating in multiple local investigations and earning a reputation for his keen instincts. Children adored him, and adults respected him, often simultaneously. Today, Rex's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the nervous energy of the room, making him a silent anchor in the chaos. The judge, a tall man with a stern yet fair expression, entered the room and took his seat behind the elevated bench. His gavel echoed sharply against the high ceiling as he called the court to order. Lawyers shuffled their papers, whispering to one another, while court clerks scurried about, preparing documents and double-checking schedules. The air carried a blend of anticipation and routine. Everyone assumed this would be an ordinary day. Yet there was something in the energy, a subtle tension, that suggested this day would not be ordinary at all. Sarah glanced down at Lily, trying to keep her daughter settled. "Sweetie, just sit here and watch," she whispered. Lily nodded, but her attention was impossible to control. She peered at Rex, her small hand rising instinctively, pointing toward him with curiosity and recognition. "Doggy," she murmured softly, almost to herself. The word was simple, yet it drew brief smiles from nearby officers, who glanced at her with mild amusement. They assumed she was simply reacting like any other toddler would to a dog. But Lily's gaze was unusually fixed, her expression a mixture of wonder and deep focus. As the court clerk began calling the case, the spectators leaned forward, their eyes shifting between the judge and the lawyers. The defendant, a man in his mid-30s, sat nervously, his hands folded tightly on the table. His attorney whispered in his ear, occasionally gesturing toward the documents in front of them. Witnesses fidgeted in their seats, some avoiding eye contact, while others rehearsed their statements under their breath. The tension in the room grew, the ordinary sounds of a courthouse, a scratch of pens, the rustle of papers taking on an amplified significance in the charged atmosphere. Rex remained motionless, ears twitching occasionally as he tracked subtle movements in the room. His handler, Officer Daniels, stood close, hands resting lightly on the leash. He observed the courtroom as carefully as any detective, noting expressions, gestures, and the subtle shifts in energy. A seasoned canine officer, Daniels knew that even in routine demonstrations, animals like Rex could pick up on details humans overlooked. He glanced down at Lily, noticing her intense focus on the dog. "Looks like we have an admirer," he muttered quietly to himself, smirking at the tiny girl. Meanwhile, reporters adjusted their cameras and microphones, preparing to capture every angle. One journalist whispered to another, "Why is it so crowded today?" "It's just a standard assault case." The other shrugged. Maybe the police dog brought in more attention than expected. People love that stuff. Indeed, the combination of a small-town trial and a police dog demonstration had drawn an unusual level of interest. For many, Rex's presence was the highlight of the morning. For Lily, it was something more, a source of fascination and a focus of attention that no one yet understood. The trial formally began with opening statements. The prosecuting attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Linda Crawford, outlined the case clearly, detailing events that had led to the charges. The defense attorney countered methodically, emphasizing inconsistencies in witness testimonies. All the while, Lily's eyes never left Rex. She pointed intermittently, whispering under her breath, her small voice almost drowned by the adult conversation, but still noticeable to those nearby. There, she muttered at one point, drawing a glance from her mother, who gave a gentle nudge to quiet her. From Lily's perspective, the courtroom was a strange blend of familiar and mysterious. She noticed subtle details. Adults overlooked the slight twitch of an officer's eyebrow, the way Rex's tail flicked in response to certain sounds, the faint click of the defendant's shoes on the tile floor. Each observation built in her mind, forming connections she couldn't yet articulate. Adults might dismiss these as trivial or coincidental, but Lily's young mind recorded everything with astonishing clarity. As the judge called for the first witness, the tension in the room thickened. Lawyers leaned forward, pens poised to jot notes. The defendant's face betrayed a mix of worry and exhaustion. Reporters adjusted their cameras, ensuring every angle was covered. Yet in the midst of all this, Lily sat quietly, stuffed bear in lap, eyes locked on Rex. She pointed again, and this time her whisper was a little louder. "Doggy, look!" The adults nearby chuckled softly, assuming it was innocent toddler excitement. But something lingered in the air, a sense that her attention was more than simple fascination. The judge paused, briefly glancing toward the child. "Is there a problem, young lady?" he asked kindly. Lily shook her head, still pointing. Her mother smiled apologetically. "She's just watching the dog," Sarah explained. The judge nodded, returning to the case, unaware that Lily's observation might soon change everything. As opening statements concluded, the room fell into a brief, tense silence. Witnesses prepared for their testimony. Lawyers adjusted notes, and officers shifted their weight on their feet. Lily's gaze never wavered from Rex. Her tiny fingers twitched, her brow furrowed in concentration. For most adults, the morning had been ordinary. For Lily, it was a moment of quiet observation, a calm before a storm that would soon capture the attention of everyone in the courtroom. And then, just beyond the murmur of legal procedure and the hum of anticipation, a tiny voice prepared to break through a voice that would soon deliver two words no one would forget. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted as Officer Daniels stepped forward, guiding Rex to the center of the room. The polished floor reflected the dog's dark fur, giving him an almost heroic appearance under the overhead lights. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, some curious, some skeptical. The canine demonstration was supposed to be routine, a display of training and obedience. But the combination of a courtroom audience and the gravity of a trial made it feel ceremonial, almost sacred. Rex's deep brown eyes scanned the room with alert precision, every muscle coiled in anticipation, ready to perform on command. Officer Daniels knelt beside Rex and issued a crisp command. "Heel." Instantly, the dog obeyed, walking flawlessly beside his handler, ears erect, tail steady. The courtroom murmured in appreciation. Even the judge's eyes softened with faint amusement. Lily's fingers twitched excitedly as she whispered, "Wow," under her breath, holding her stuffed bear tightly. She had watched Rex in action before at community events, But seeing him here, in the solemn setting of a courtroom, felt different important. Her fascination wasn't merely childish excitement. It was a focus that seemed almost purposeful, as if she understood something adults had yet to notice. Officer Daniels moved to demonstrate more advanced commands. He tossed a small rubber object across the room, and Rex sprinted, retrieving it in seconds, returning obediently at Daniels' side. Applause broke out quietly among the spectators. "He's incredible," muttered one parent, leaning toward another. Lily clapped softly, eyes wide, pointing again. "Doggy, fast!" she exclaimed. Officers chuckled softly at her enthusiasm, but Daniel's gaze lingered thoughtfully on the child. Most toddlers would giggle and fidget, distracted by toys or curiosity. Lily's intense observation, however, suggested something deeper, a quiet intelligence that seemed to resonate with Rex's calm, deliberate actions. As the demonstration continued, Rex performed a series of maneuvers designed to test obedience under stress. He navigated a maze of chairs and cones, stopped on command, and even barked to signal a mock alert. The courtroom audience remained engaged, impressed by the dog's skill. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, capturing the performance on both video and paper. Lawyers, though trying to maintain professional composure, leaned slightly forward, their interest piqued. It was unusual to see the dog so directly integrated into a legal proceeding, and the blend of precision and spectacle captivated everyone present. Meanwhile, Lily's attention never wavered. Her little hand raised repeatedly, pointing at Rex whenever he executed a command flawlessly. "There," she whispered, voice barely audible. Her mother, Sarah, glanced nervously, trying to quiet her daughter without breaking the spell of the moment. The officers and lawyers nearby laughed quietly at the child's enthusiasm, assuming it was nothing more than a toddler's delight. But to someone like Officer Daniels, who had trained Rex for years, the child's reactions were intriguing. Lily wasn't reacting randomly. Her gaze and gestures seemed to track the dog's every subtle movement, almost as if she were noticing patterns others couldn't see. Rex's training included scent detection, search and rescue cues, and behavioral observation. He had been involved in high-stakes investigations, locating missing persons, and even alerting officers to hidden dangers. Today, however, his role was ceremonial, yet the audience had no idea of the depth of his abilities. Lily's fascination hinted at a connection she didn't fully understand, but that would soon prove critical. She watched the dog's tail, ears, and subtle body shifts, noticing things adults failed to register. At one point, Daniels asked Rex to perform a find command, indicating a small bag hidden behind a chair. Rex hesitated momentarily, sniffed deliberately, then retrieved the bag flawlessly. The audience applauded again, and Lily's little hands clapped in unison, eyes bright. "Good doggy," she whispered, voice filled with excitement and certainty. Her gaze, however, lingered longer than most children would, following Rex's every move with an intensity that made Sarah glance down in slight concern. Was it too much for a toddler? Or was Lily simply absorbing something important that no one else could see? As the demonstration continued, Daniels encouraged Rex to navigate a more complex series of obstacles. The dog moved through the course with remarkable agility, jumping over low barriers, weaving between chairs, and pausing only when commanded. Spectators whispered in admiration, impressed by the fluidity and precision of Rex's movements. Lily pointed persistently, occasionally whispering small comments, her voice barely audible yet filled with purpose. "There, there," she murmured at intervals, each time drawing curious glances from adults nearby. Her observations, though dismissed by most, mirrored subtle cues Rex displayed cues that might later reveal crucial insights. The judge, observing silently from his bench, noticed Lily's focus. He gave a faint nod to Sarah, as if acknowledging the child's fascination without disrupting proceedings. Officers exchanged quiet smiles, amused by the toddler's dedication. Reporters snapped photographs, capturing the unusual scene. A tiny girl completely absorbed in a demonstration, a powerful police dog performing flawlessly, and adults watching with measured curiosity. A contrast of innocence and experience created an unexpected tension in the room. Then, something subtle happened. Rex's ears twitched as he detected a scent signal from a small, unassuming corner of the courtroom. He paused briefly, tilting his head, alert but calm. Lily's eyes followed the exact movement. Her little hand shot up, pointing firmly, and she whispered, louder this time, "There!" Her voice, though small, resonated across the room enough for a few nearby adults to notice. Heads turned. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly, and Officer Daniels studied the dog, recognizing that Rex was signaling something unusual, something adults had not anticipated. The tension heightened. Lawyers paused, witnesses stiffened, and the courtroom seemed to lean collectively toward the small girl. Lily, still clutching her bear, didn't waver. She repeated her observation, pointing decisively. To anyone else, it might have seemed coincidental, a toddler randomly pointing at a dog. But Daniels knew better. Rex's instincts were never wrong. If he reacted, there was a reason. And Lily's attention mirrored his reaction, highlighting a moment of intuitive connection between child and animal. Whispers spread quietly. Did the child notice something important? One officer muttered. Another shrugged, unsure, while reporters immediately jotted down notes, sensing the drama unfolding. Lawyers shifted in their seats, eyebrows raised, realizing the situation might introduce a factor they hadn't considered. The courtroom had transformed from a space of routine proceedings into a stage for something entirely unpredictable. A silent dialogue between a 3-year-old, a highly trained police dog, and the subtle signals that adults were just beginning to recognize. Lily's gaze locked with Rex's for a brief moment, an unspoken understanding passing between them. She didn't know the complexities of law or the significance of a trial, yet she had noticed something others missed. Her small voice and pointed finger carried a clarity that only innocence and pure observation could achieve. Adults were focused on words, documents, and legal arguments. Lily was focused on truth. The courtroom, in its collective seriousness, had unknowingly shifted its attention to a child whose perspective might matter more than anyone realized. As the demonstration neared its conclusion, Daniels allowed Rex to perform one final maneuver, a mock alert on a hidden object simulating a case clue. Rex paused, sniffed the air, and tilted his head again, this time in the direction of an entirely different area. Lily's eyes widened, and her tiny finger shot out, pointing with certainty. "Not there," she exclaimed, her words barely audible but piercing through the courtroom's quiet. Adults leaned forward, startled by the clarity and conviction of a toddler's observation. Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing the moment forever. The demonstration ended, and Rex returned obediently to Daniel's side. Applause rippled through the courtroom, but all attention had shifted subtly. It wasn't just the dog's skill that had captivated the audience, it was the connection between Lily and Rex. Adults whispered in disbelief, realizing that a child's perspective had aligned perfectly with a highly trained police dog's instincts. What had begun as a simple demonstration had quietly become something more, a prelude to an extraordinary moment that would soon change the course of the trial entirely. The courtroom settled as the judge called the first witness to the stand. A hush fell over the room, punctuated only by the shuffling of papers and the occasional creak of wooden benches. The trial was now underway, and what had begun as a routine case now carried an undercurrent of anticipation. The defendant, a man in his mid-30s, sat at the table with his lawyer, hands nervously folded. He avoided eye contact, his jaw tight with unease. Across the room, prosecutors whispered among themselves, reviewing notes and preparing for cross-examination. Lily remained perched on her mother's lap, her tiny fingers gripping her stuffed bear. Her eyes, wide and curious, scanned the courtroom as though she were cataloging every detail. To most adults, the trial was a jumble of facts, evidence, and legal terminology. To Lily, it was a living puzzle, a series of movements, sounds, and gestures that spoke louder than words. Every glance, every twitch of a finger, every subtle posture change caught her attention. She watched Rex carefully, noting how his behavior subtly shifted in response to the people around him. The first witness, a local shop owner, recounted the events leading up to the incident that had brought the case to court. He spoke clearly, his voice steady, but his hands betrayed a faint nervousness. Lawyers scribbled notes, glancing occasionally at documents and photographs laid out on the table. Observers followed the testimony with interest, murmuring quietly among themselves. Lily, however, was less concerned with the words and more attuned to movements. Rex's tail flicked slightly when the witness mentioned a certain detail, and Lily's eyes followed, absorbing the unspoken cues. She pointed quietly, murmuring to herself, "There, there." Sarah, noticing her daughter's intense focus, tried to keep Lily calm. "Sweetie, just watch quietly," she whispered. But Lily's attention was relentless. She had noticed small discrepancies that even the lawyers might have overlooked, the way the witness's gaze shifted when certain names were mentioned, the subtle tightening of hands, and the direction of Rex's alert posture. To a toddler, these were simple observations, but they formed a tapestry of understanding that adults had yet to recognize. The second witness, a neighbor who had seen the incident from across the street, took the stand. Her account conflicted slightly with the first, causing murmurs in the courtroom. Lawyers leaned forward, pens scratching across notepads, trying to reconcile the differences. But Lily's focus never wavered. She noticed subtle clues in body language, micro-expressions, and the dog's reactions that suggested something more. When the neighbor mentioned a shadow moving near a particular corner of the room, Rex's ears twitched, and Lily pointed, whispering, "Look there." Her words were quiet, but her conviction was unmistakable. The judge, observing the proceedings, noticed Lily's pointed gestures. He smiled faintly, but did not interrupt, assuming it was innocent childlike fascination. Other adults, however, began to take subtle notice. The defense attorney leaned toward the prosecutor and whispered something under his breath. "Is she noticing the dog's cues?" he murmured. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow, unsure whether it was a coincidence or something more significant. In a room filled with adults focused on facts, arguments, and procedure, a small child's intuitive observation was quietly challenging the assumptions everyone had taken for granted. Rex remained vigilant, responding only when prompted, but visibly alert to subtle changes. His body language, ear flicks, tail movements, slight shifts in stance, was something he had been trained to control, yet even controlled, it revealed hints. Lily noticed. Each time Rex reacted, she pointed or murmured, often before adults realized anything was amiss. Her small voice, filled with curiosity and conviction, began to draw attention from those closest to her. The courtroom, previously a space of strict adult authority, now contained a dynamic of quiet tension between child, dog, and human observation. As the trial progressed, the defense attorney presented evidence meant to exonerate the defendant. Photographs, documents, and testimonies were scrutinized in detail. Witnesses repeated statements, some with slight variations. Adults argued over timelines, angles, and interpretations. Yet Lily's focus remained unwavering. She seemed to understand, in her own way, the significance of what Rex had been signaling during the demonstration. Every wag, tilt, or pause of the dog became a clue in her young mind. The contrast between adult argumentation and childlike perception was stark, a reminder that insight does not always follow formal training. Midway through the morning, the court took a brief recess. Spectators murmured softly, stretching their legs and discussing the early developments. Reporters jotted notes frantically, eager to capture every nuance for their articles. Lawyers whispered in corners, re-evaluating strategy. Lily, however, remained in her mother's lap, her gaze fixed on Rex, who sat patiently beside Officer Daniels. "There, see him?" she whispered, pointing again. Sarah smiled, unsure whether to correct her daughter or allow her to observe. The precision and seriousness of Lily's attention contrasted sharply with the casual chatter of adults around her. When proceedings resumed, the next witness was called a police officer who had investigated the scene. His testimony included details about the dog's behavior during initial assessments. The courtroom listened intently, some taking notes, others simply observing. Lily's eyes widened. She noticed the correlation between what the officer described and Rex's subtle movements during the demonstration. Her tiny hand rose, pointing decisively. "Not there," she murmured. The judge, briefly glancing toward the child, smiled at her earnestness. No one expected her words to matter, yet the conviction behind them hinted at a deeper understanding than her age suggested. Lawyers began to take note. The defense attorney leaned slightly forward, watching the child intently. "What is she noticing?" he whispered to his colleague. The prosecutor tilted his head, equally curious. While adults focused on technicalities and legal arguments, Lily's attention tracked patterns that only someone attuned to detail, both human and animal, could perceive. Each subtle cue, unnoticed by most, built toward a revelation. The courtroom's dynamic was quietly shifting. A 3-year-old's perception, guided by instinct and attention, was subtly challenging the authority of years of legal experience. By midday, the tension was palpable. Witness after witness recounted events, and adults debated minutiae. Yet Lily remained focused on Rex. She pointed persistently, occasionally murmuring, her small voice cutting through the hum of adult conversation. Spectators began to notice the consistency of her observations. Some smiled at the child's fascination. Others, especially law enforcement officers, exchanged glances. Daniels, standing near Rex, observed Lily closely. He understood that her attention to the dog's behavior might provide an unanticipated clarity. It was a quiet, almost invisible thread of understanding forming between child and animal, one the courtroom had yet to fully grasp. As the morning session drew to a close, Lily's repeated gestures and whispers had captured subtle but significant patterns. The judge called for a short recess, allowing everyone to stretch and regroup. Reporters whispered among themselves, noting the unusual interaction. Lawyers glanced at each other, the defense team exchanging a knowing look. And through it all, Lily remained calm, clutching her stuffed bear. Eyes never leaving Rex. The child had become more than a bystander. She had become a silent observer whose attention to detail would soon play a pivotal role in the unfolding trial. In that quiet courtroom, the ordinary had begun to transform into the extraordinary. A toddler's observations, guided by instinct and focus, were quietly threading their way into the adult world of logic and procedure. The trial, meant to follow a predictable course, now carried the weight of an unseen partnership between child and dog. What adults interpreted as routine or coincidence, Lily understood through attention and curiosity. And as everyone prepared to return from recess, an unspoken anticipation filled the room. Something remarkable was about to happen. The courtroom was tense, filled with the low hum of whispered conversations and the scratching of pens across legal pads. Witnesses had come and gone, each adding details that seemed both important and contradictory. Lawyers huddled, consulting their notes, while the judge observed with measured attention. But amid all the official proceedings, the focus of one tiny observer was unshakable. 3-year-old Lily, seated on her mother's lap, clutched her stuffed bear and watched Rex with unwavering attention. Her small fingers twitched slightly, pointing at the police dog as though she were trying to communicate something only she and Rex could understand. The defense attorney had just concluded questioning a key witness when Lily suddenly straightened in her seat. Her wide brown eyes locked on Rex, who for a moment sat with his ears perked, tail still, head tilted slightly. It was the kind of subtle cue only a trained canine handler would normally notice. But Lily noticed it too, and not only noticed it, she responded to it instinctively. Her tiny hand shot forward, pointing decisively at Rex, her small voice breaking the soft murmur of the courtroom. There. The room fell silent. Heads turned, eyes following the finger of a 3-year-old. Cameras clicked and reporters whispered in disbelief. The judge paused, gavel halfway raised, unsure if the interruption was worth noting. Lawyers froze mid-gesture. Even the defendant looked momentarily confused, eyebrows raised in surprise. For a moment, the courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. What could a 3-year-old possibly see or understand that the seasoned adults had overlooked? Sarah, Lily's mother, whispered quickly, trying to calm her daughter. "Sweetheart, be quiet," she urged softly, her eyes darting nervously around the room. But Lily did not waver. She pointed again, her tiny finger unwavering, and whispered 2 words simple, yet charged with clarity. Not him. The courtroom erupted with reaction. The judge lowered his gavel, stunned. The defense attorney leaned forward, eyes widening. The prosecutor blinked, processing the unexpected intervention. Officers exchanged astonished glances. Did she just say that? One whispered. Reporters scribbled furiously, realizing they had witnessed an unprecedented moment. The words were brief, but their significance rippled immediately through the room. All eyes turned toward Rex, who remained calm but alert, his gaze shifting to the area Lily had indicated. Officer Daniels knelt beside him, eyes narrowing slightly. "Rex, show me," he murmured softly. The dog's response was subtle but unmistakable. A tilt of the head, a shift in stance, a small deliberate step toward the location Lily had pointed out. Those familiar with canine cues recognized immediately that the dog was indicating something meaningful, something adults had consistently misinterpreted until now. The judge adjusted his glasses, glancing from the child to the dog. "Explain," he said quietly, though he was already beginning to understand. The courtroom leaned forward. Witnesses who had testified earlier shifted nervously in their seats, sensing that a detail they had assumed irrelevant might now be central. Lawyers scrambled to organize their thoughts, cross-referencing statements and evidence. The adult world, so confident in procedure and protocol, was suddenly confronted with clarity that had come from the most unlikely source. A 3-year-old girl and a police dog. Lily, still clutching her stuffed bear, did not speak again. Her eyes followed Rex's every movement, her small body tense with anticipation. She did not understand the legal implications of her words, but instinctively, she had noticed what adults had overlooked. In the silence that followed, the courtroom seemed to shrink around the duo. All attention was focused on this subtle exchange, on the 2-word declaration that had reframed the entire proceeding. Daniels stepped forward cautiously, motioning for Rex to demonstrate the cue more clearly. "Good boy," he murmured, kneeling. Rex moved deliberately to indicate the correct position, confirming Lily's observation. A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. The judge adjusted his notes, now carefully documenting the alignment of the child's observation with the dog's trained response. The defense attorney whispered to his client, "This changes everything," while the prosecutor's jaw tightened in thoughtful consideration. The two words had immediately redirected the focus of the case. Observers in the courtroom began to realize the magnitude of what had occurred. What seemed like a toddler's innocent remark had revealed an error in adult assumptions. Witnesses glanced at each other, some nodding quietly, acknowledging that a detail they had overlooked was suddenly illuminated. Even reporters, trained to remain detached, leaned forward, sensing that they were witnessing a story of human perception and instinct that defied expectation. Lily, though unaware of the larger implications, had become the catalyst for truth in a room built on procedure and testimony. The judge cleared his throat. "It appears we have an unusual situation," he said, his tone measured but tinged with surprise. He gestured toward the defense attorney. "Would you like to address the court regarding the observation?" The attorney rose, carefully choosing words that acknowledged the child's input while remaining professional. "Your Honor," he said, "the child's observation aligns with evidence we had not fully considered. Rex's behavior confirms her statement." The courtroom was quiet except for the soft, steady breathing of those present. The gravity of the moment began to settle over everyone. Children are rarely considered reliable observers in legal matters, yet here was proof that innocence and acute perception could intersect to reveal a truth that adults had missed. Officers nodded quietly, impressed by the intuitive connection between Lily and Rex. The defendant sat rigid, a mixture of apprehension and hope etched on his face. Lily's mother finally exhaled, leaning forward to whisper softly, "You did very well, sweetheart." Lily merely nodded, her eyes fixed on Rex, unaware that she had just become the center of an extraordinary moment. The courtroom had collectively shifted focus from legal argument to observation, from assumed knowledge to unfiltered perception. A 3-year-old's 2 words, "Not him," had not only interrupted proceedings, but reframed the understanding of the case itself. Officer Daniels observed quietly, pride evident in his expression. Rex, loyal and calm, had validated the child's perception. The interplay of instinct, training, and observation was now undeniable. In a courtroom dominated by rules, procedures, and adult assumptions, it was a child's clarity that cut through ambiguity, exposing a truth that might otherwise have been overlooked. The judge scribbled notes, aware that this moment, brief yet powerful, would resonate far beyond the day's trial. Whispers spread quickly among the spectators. Some parents marveled at the child's acuity. Some reporters began to speculate on the story's broader implications. The courtroom, once dominated by debate and legal jargon, now vibrated with awe and quiet amazement. It was a reminder of the power of innocence, perception, and the sometimes overlooked intelligence of children when paired with an attentive animal. The moment also highlighted the limitations of human perception. While adults relied on memory, testimony, and documentation, Lily relied on instinct and observation, unfiltered by assumptions or bias. Her words, simple and direct, provided a lens through which everyone in the room began to see the case differently. Adults leaned forward, reviewing evidence in their minds, rethinking earlier testimony, and connecting the dots in ways that had eluded them until now. By the end of the demonstration, the courtroom was silent, each individual processing the unexpected turn of events. Lily, still seated on her mother's lap, hugged her bear tightly, content in her quiet focus. Rex remained calm, as if acknowledging the child's insight. Officer Daniels patted the dog gently, a silent nod to their shared understanding. The judge leaned back, contemplative, realizing that the courtroom had just witnessed an unprecedented intersection of innocence, instinct, and trained skill. The trial would continue, but the momentum had shifted. The 2 words spoken by a tiny girl had not only captured attention, they had altered perception. What adults had overlooked, a child and a dog had revealed. The courtroom now braced for the next phase, knowing that the revelation from a 3-year-old would echo through the proceedings, forever changing the dynamics of observation, judgment, and truth. The courtroom remained frozen for a moment, stunned by Lily's 2 words, "Not him." Adults blinked, some exchanging incredulous glances. Lawyers shuffled papers, unsure how to proceed. The judge's gavel rested idle on the bench, the weight of the tiny girl's declaration hanging in the air. Even reporters, trained to capture facts without emotion, leaned forward, sensing the significance of the moment. What had begun as a routine trial now pivoted on the insight of a 3-year-old and the subtle cues of a police dog. Officer Daniels knelt beside Rex, studying the dog's behavior. Every K9 handler present knew that Rex would never react without reason. His stance, the tilt of his head, the flick of his ears, these were deliberate, trained responses. When Lily had pointed and said, "Not him," Rex had confirmed her observation instinctively. The realization struck Daniels with the gravity of truth. A toddler had just highlighted a crucial detail that adults had consistently misinterpreted. The alignment between child and dog was undeniable, a silent confirmation of what had gone unnoticed until now. The defense attorney rose slowly, adjusting his tie, careful to address the court with professionalism. "Your Honor," he began, "the child's observation aligns with the behavior of the trained K9. It indicates that a critical piece of evidence may have been misinterpreted. We request the court to consider the dog's response alongside her statement when evaluating testimony and evidence." His voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. The courtroom collectively absorbed his words, his significance sinking in. The prosecutor frowned, leaning slightly forward. She had anticipated a rigorous defense, not an unexpected revelation from a child in the gallery. Yet the alignment between Lily's words and Rex's trained cues was impossible to ignore. Whispering to her assistant, she recalibrated her strategy, considering how the new perspective could alter the interpretation of witness statements. Adults, experienced and methodical, were being reminded that truth sometimes came from the most unlikely sources. 2 words had shifted the entire trial. Witnesses who had testified earlier now appeared nervous, glancing at Rex and then at Lily. Could a toddler and a dog truly contradict or clarify their accounts? Their uncertainty rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, reviewing notes and observing the subtle reactions between child and animal. He had presided over countless trials, but rarely had an observation from someone so young carried potential weight in a legal proceeding. The intersection of innocence and trained instinct had created a moment of clarity no one anticipated. Rex, obedient and calm, remained seated beside Daniels, ears flicking toward the location Lily had indicated. His movements were precise, deliberate, and trained, but also instinctual. The courtroom had relied on human testimony and documented evidence until now. Yet here was a non-human participant providing insight in perfect harmony with a child's observation. The adult world had underestimated the combined clarity of innocence and instinct, and suddenly, what had seemed like chaos in witness accounts now took shape as a coherent clue. Sarah held Lily close, her heartbeat quickening with both pride and nervous anticipation. Her daughter's words were simple, yet they carried a depth no adult had initially perceived. Lily, unaware of the courtroom's intensity, simply clutched her bear and pointed when Rex indicated, reinforcing her own observation. Her clarity came without analysis, without bias, pure perception. Adults had long debates, argued interpretations, and weighed complex evidence, but sometimes truth was distilled in simplicity, in 2 words, and in the alignment of observation between a child and a dog. The judge cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "We will allow a brief recess," he announced, "to verify the observations regarding the canine's behavior and the relevance of the child's statement. The court will reconvene shortly." Lawyers rose, whispering urgently. Reporters scribbled furiously, recognizing that today's trial had transformed into a story of intuition and innocence rather than mere procedure. Officers huddled quietly, discussing Rex's behavior and confirming the alignment with Lily's observation. It was a rare, almost cinematic moment where training, instinct, and a child's perception converged. During the recess, whispers rippled through the spectators. Some marveled at Lily's clarity. Others questioned how a 3-year-old could perceive something adults had missed. Officers praised Rex quietly, recognizing his subtle communication, and reporters debated the remarkable alignment of human and canine perception. Even lawyers, hardened by years of courtroom experience, found themselves reconsidering what they thought they knew about the case. The courtroom had become a crucible where innocence, instinct, and professional experience intersected in a way that none could have predicted. When proceedings resumed, the focus shifted subtly but decisively. Lawyers now referred to the alignment between Rex and Lily, recalibrating questions to witnesses. Witnesses, who had been confident moments before, now hesitated as subtle details were re-examined. The judge carefully noted each movement, remarking on the unusual but undeniable clarity provided by the child's observation. Adults realized that, sometimes, simple honesty and unfiltered observation could outweigh years of experience, analysis, and procedure. Lily remained quietly attentive, her small hand occasionally raising to point at Rex. She did not understand the legal significance of her actions, but instinctively she had communicated a truth adults had overlooked. Her role in the trial was unintentional, yet profound. What had begun as an ordinary demonstration by a police dog had revealed a critical perspective that no adult had accounted for. The courtroom had shifted from debate to verification, guided by 2 words spoken by a tiny girl with clear perception. Officer Daniels knelt by Rex once more, gesturing toward the area Lily had indicated. The dog responded predictably, highlighting the alignment of instinct and perception. Lawyers, now fully aware of the potential impact, requested clarification from witnesses, verifying details that might have been overlooked or misinterpreted. The courtroom became a space where evidence was reconsidered in light of new insight, showing how even small voices could wield significant influence when paired with observation and instinct. The defendant's demeanor shifted noticeably. Relief mingled with apprehension in his expression as the implications of Lily's words became clear. He had hoped for fairness, and suddenly, a child's observation seemed to steer the proceedings toward a more accurate understanding. Witnesses exchanged glances, some nodding, others visibly tense, realizing that a minor oversight had been corrected by the sharp eyes of innocence and the precision of a trained dog. As the trial resumed in earnest, the courtroom now operated under a new perspective. The adult participants recalibrated their expectations, considering the implications of Lily's observation at every step. Lawyers referenced the dog's behavior, witnesses adjusted statements, and the judge carefully weighed the emerging clarity. What had been a simple trial had evolved into a rare demonstration of human perception, instinct, and the unfiltered clarity of a child. By mid-afternoon, the courtroom was transformed. The alignment of Lily's observation and Rex's trained behavior had become central to understanding the case. Adults, lawyers, witnesses, officers, and the judge had shifted from procedural certainty to attentive observation, reconsidering details they had assumed settled. The 2 words spoken by a 3-year-old had revealed a perspective so profound it could not be ignored, reshaping the trial and emphasizing that sometimes innocence can uncover truths hidden to even the most experienced eyes. The revelation was not merely a novelty. It was a turning point. The courtroom had witnessed the rare intersection of instinct, observation, and unfiltered honesty. Adults, conditioned to rely on testimony and documented evidence, now understood that clarity could arrive in the most unexpected forms. Lily's insight, simple yet profound, had illuminated a critical truth that would guide the remainder of the trial. The story of a 3-year-old and a police dog had begun to unfold as a lesson in perception, intuition, and the unexpected ways truth can emerge. The courtroom, once orderly and predictable, now buzzed with subtle energy, a mix of awe and cautious recalibration. Witnesses shifted nervously, lawyers huddled quietly, and the judge carefully consulted his notes. Lily's 2 words, "not him," had triggered a ripple effect that was still unfolding. Officer Daniels remained near Rex, his trained dog calm but attentive, every movement deliberate, every signal scrutinized. The courtroom had entered uncharted territory, where a child's clarity and a dog's instinct challenged decades of human judgment. The defense attorney was the first to adjust. He whispered to his client, "Stay calm. This changes our perspective, but it could work in our favor." His client nodded, visibly relieved yet anxious. The attorney rose to address the court. "Your Honor, in light of the child's observation and the canine's indication, we request the court allow further examination of the evidence. It may clarify critical points that have been misunderstood." The judge, attentive yet cautious, nodded. This was unusual but undeniably valid. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She had relied on witness statements and circumstantial evidence, expecting a straightforward argument. Now she faced a new challenge, integrating a child's observation into the official proceedings. Her assistant whispered suggestions, and she leaned forward, considering how to maintain credibility while acknowledging the unprecedented development. In this moment, every adult in the room had to reconsider the assumptions they had taken for granted. Witnesses were called back to the stand, one by one. Each was questioned again, this time with an awareness of Lily's observation. Subtle details were revisited, the direction of movement, hand gestures, and even tone of voice. Officer Daniels demonstrated Rex's trained reactions, highlighting how the dog's cues corresponded to factual events. Adults watched intently, their skepticism replaced by cautious intrigue. The courtroom had become a space of verification and reflection, a hybrid of legal procedure and observation-based insight. Lily, still perched on her mother's lap, observed quietly. She did not speak, but her eyes followed Rex, noting his every movement. Each tiny gesture seemed to reinforce the truth she had already indicated. She pointed occasionally, not demanding attention, but silently affirming what she perceived. Adults noticed the consistency, the calm certainty in a child's observation. Where they relied on memory, judgment, and analysis, Lily relied on instinct and focus, 2 qualities that had now shifted the balance of attention in the room. Officer Daniels guided Rex to perform specific movements, highlighting how the dog's training allowed him to detect discrepancies or truths in behavior. The demonstration aligned perfectly with Lily's earlier indication. The room seemed to pause collectively as adults reconciled their professional training with the undeniable alignment of child and canine perception. Lawyers adjusted questions, witnesses reviewed statements, and even the judge leaned forward, considering how this subtle interplay of instinct and observation could influence the case. A hush fell when the defense attorney asked the court to consider specific evidence that had been misinterpreted initially. He referenced Lily's observation and Rex's cues to demonstrate a possible misunderstanding in witness testimony. Adults listened intently, scribbling notes, nodding in acknowledgement of the new perspective. The child's words, initially dismissed as innocent curiosity, had now become a valid lens through which the case could be understood. The courtroom had shifted from debate to careful reconsideration, from assumption to verification. Sarah watched her daughter, feeling a mixture of pride and awe. Lily had no concept of the legal intricacies, yet her clarity had provided an insight adults had overlooked. Holding her bear, she simply observed Rex and the courtroom, her small presence having created ripples that transformed the proceedings. Spectators murmured quietly, recognizing the extraordinary moment they were witnessing. A tiny child had managed to impact a courtroom in a way no adult could have anticipated. The prosecutor adjusted her approach, questioning witnesses again with attention to subtle inconsistencies. Each detail previously dismissed as insignificant was now scrutinized under a new lens. The courtroom atmosphere shifted from confident assertion to attentive investigation, a direct result of Lily's observation. Lawyers collaborated silently, witnesses hesitated in thoughtful reconsideration, and the judge carefully monitored the adjustments. The process had become less about arguing points and more about uncovering truths that had been hidden in plain sight. Rex, trained to respond to both commands and instinctual cues, moved through the demonstration calmly. His every step and tilt reflected a methodical, trained perception, yet also validated the child's observations. The courtroom watched closely as the dog and child seemed to communicate without words. Adults marveled silently, realizing that sometimes insight could transcend verbal argument, documentation, or experience. Two agents of clarity, a toddler and a highly trained police dog, had reshaped the framework of a legal proceeding. As the trial continued, the implications of Lily's input became increasingly apparent. Witnesses revised statements, lawyers restructured arguments, and the judge allowed careful integration of the new perspective into proceedings. What had been a routine trial transformed into a nuanced investigation, where subtle observation and instinct played pivotal roles. The courtroom had become a dynamic ecosystem of perception, where even the smallest participant could influence outcomes significantly. The defense attorney paused to address the judge directly. "Your Honor, we request that the child's observation and Rex's behavior be formally noted in the record. It may provide clarity where traditional testimony has left ambiguity." The judge nodded thoughtfully, his expression a mix of fascination and approval. "So noted," he said, tapping the gavel lightly. Adults in the courtroom leaned forward, some exchanging quiet nods, recognizing the rare and profound impact of a child's perception in a legal context. Reporters whispered furiously among themselves, capturing notes and photographing moments. A 3-year-old's 2 words, combined with a dog's trained instinct, had transformed what would have been a mundane trial into an extraordinary story of intuition, observation, and truth. The courtroom had shifted focus from argumentation and assumption to attentive verification and recognition of subtle cues. Every adult present now understood that insight did not always come from experience or study. It could also emerge from innocence and instinct. As the afternoon wore on, the courtroom operated with heightened awareness. Each witness considered their words carefully, knowing that minor inconsistencies could now be highlighted through observation rather than argument alone. Lawyers moved cautiously, recalibrating strategies with a newfound respect for subtle perception. The defendant, observing the quiet unfolding of truth, allowed a flicker of hope to cross his face. The alignment between Lily's insight and Rex's response had altered the dynamics of the case irreversibly. By the end of the day, the courtroom had been fundamentally transformed. What had begun as a straightforward trial had become a testament to perception, collaboration, and the unexpected ways insight can emerge. The proceedings were far from over, but adults now approached every detail with renewed attention, aware that clarity could come from the most unlikely sources. Lily, oblivious to her extraordinary role, continued to watch quietly, clutching her bear, her small presence reshaping a world of adults and experience. The courtroom had learned an invaluable lesson. Truth is not always confined to testimony, documentation, or years of expertise. Sometimes it is distilled through simplicity, innocence, and instinct, the perceptive eyes of a child and the trained senses of a dog. What unfolded in that courtroom that afternoon would be remembered not merely for legal outcome, but for the profound demonstration of observation and the power of unlikely insight. By the morning of the next court session, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted completely. What had begun as a routine trial had transformed into a spectacle of observation, instinct, and unexpected clarity. Spectators whispered among themselves, lawyers moved with heightened focus, and the judge maintained a careful, contemplative demeanor. Every participant, witnesses, officers, reporters, was acutely aware that the pivotal insight of a 3-year-old and a highly trained police dog had reshaped the proceedings. The courtroom was no longer just a legal space. It had become a stage for truth to reveal itself through perception rather than argument. Lily arrived once more, clutching her stuffed bear, her mother Sarah guiding her to their usual seat. The child's wide eyes scanned the room, immediately locating Rex, who sat attentively beside Officer Daniels. The dog's calm presence seemed to anchor the room, a silent reassurance that observation and instinct were aligned. Adults looked on in a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Lawyers whispered quietly to each other, witnesses shifted nervously, and even the court reporters leaned forward, pens ready to capture every nuance of the extraordinary proceedings. The defense attorney began with a quiet, measured address. "Your Honor," he said, "we are now able to integrate observations that were previously overlooked." The child's clear indication, confirmed by Rex's trained behavior, suggests a different interpretation of the events in question. His voice carried a mixture of relief and conviction. The courtroom listened intently. This was no longer theoretical. The alignment of child and dog had created a factual framework that could no longer be ignored. The prosecutor rose, adjusting her notes. Her expression was a mix of skepticism and cautious acknowledgement. "While unconventional," she began, "the observations by the child and the K-9 may provide context for reviewing witness statements and evidence. The court should consider all factors carefully." Her acknowledgement was significant. It indicated that even the most experienced adults recognized the validity of what had seemed improbable just days before. Witnesses were called back with renewed scrutiny. Each one was asked to revisit details in light of Lily's observations and Rex's responses. What had previously been vague or inconsistent was now clarified by subtle, yet undeniable, evidence. Adults leaned forward in their seats, realizing that minor details, gestures, glances, and physical positioning could carry as much weight as verbal testimony. The courtroom's attention shifted from debate to verification, and every participant recognized that they were witnessing a rare alignment of perception and truth. Rex, calm and focused, performed carefully guided demonstrations as requested by Officer Daniels. Each movement, each tilt of his head, confirmed the subtle cues Lily had previously noted. The dog's precision and the child's instinctive clarity created a compelling synergy that was impossible to dismiss. The courtroom absorbed the implications slowly, collectively realizing that insight could come from unexpected sources, and that truth was often perceptible beyond words alone. Lily, seated quietly, occasionally pointed to Rex or to areas he indicated. She did not speak loudly, yet the subtle gestures were unmistakable. Adults observed with growing appreciation and awe. What had seemed like a charming distraction now became central to understanding the trial. The alignment of child and dog had revealed details that adults had misread, overlooked, or misinterpreted. Each small movement reinforced the clarity of her earlier statement, not him. The courtroom now recognized that her insight was not mere coincidence. The judge called for a brief recess to review the evidence in conjunction with the child's observations. Lawyers huddled, Witnesses discussed testimony quietly, and reporters took the opportunity to document every nuance. Officer Daniels consulted with the judge, explaining Rex's training, behavioral cues, and how the dog's instinctive responses had validated Lily's observations. For the first time, adults collectively acknowledged that intuition and perception, especially when aligned between child and dog, could surpass conventional analytical methods in revealing truth. When the trial resumed, the courtroom's atmosphere had evolved. Every statement was now examined under the lens of Lily's insight. Witnesses adjusted, acknowledging details they had previously overlooked. Lawyers adapted, rephrasing questions and considering nuances that had been invisible in conventional analysis. The defendant, observing the proceedings, felt a mixture of relief and cautious hope. For the first time, the truth seemed to emerge unfiltered, guided by instinct and observation rather than debate and argument alone. A pivotal moment occurred when a witness was asked about the sequence of events on the day in question. Their initial testimony had suggested the defendant was present in a location indicated by circumstantial evidence. As the witness recounted their memory, Rex tilted his head, sniffed, and subtly shifted toward another point in the room. Lily, eyes wide, pointed firmly. "No. There," she whispered, her words barely audible, yet commanding attention. The alignment between the child and the dog created a pause in the courtroom. A collective breath held in anticipation. The judge's pen hovered over notes. Lawyers leaned forward, witnesses adjusted uncomfortably, and the audience watched intently. Officer Daniels demonstrated the dog's response, carefully explaining how Rex's trained instincts aligned with Lily's observation. The revelation was undeniable. The child had perceived a crucial detail adults had consistently misinterpreted. What had appeared to be a simple contradiction in testimony was now clarified, revealing the defendant's innocence in that specific context. Whispers of astonishment spread among the spectators. Parents marveled at Lily's clarity, reporters scribbled furiously, and lawyers exchanged subtle nods. Even the prosecutor allowed a small, contemplative smile to cross her face, acknowledging the significance of what had occurred. The courtroom, structured around rules, precedent, and procedure, had been transformed into a space where perception and instinct provided decisive clarity. Two unlikely agents, a 3-year-old child and a trained police dog, had demonstrated the extraordinary impact of observation. The defense attorney rose once more, summarizing the implications. "Your Honor, the alignment between Lily's observations and Rex's trained responses provides clarity, where human testimony alone has been inconsistent. We request that this evidence be considered in evaluating the sequence of events and the credibility of previous statements." The judge nodded solemnly, recognizing the legitimacy of the argument. The courtroom now operated on a new level, blending conventional evidence with perceptual insight that transcended age and species. Lily, still seated, did not fully comprehend her role, but felt a quiet satisfaction as she observed Rex, who responded with calm acknowledgement. Adults were learning to appreciate her perception, understanding that innocence can uncover truths inaccessible to the most experienced professionals. Her contribution had shifted the trial's trajectory, emphasizing that clarity often emerges in unexpected ways. The courtroom, once dominated by analysis and debate, now existed as a space of revelation and insight. As the trial moved toward its climax, the alignment between child and dog continued to guide proceedings. Witnesses provided adjusted testimonies, lawyers recalibrated questions, and the judge allowed for careful integration of the perceptual evidence. Adults, previously confident in their conventional understanding, now operated with humility and attentiveness. 2 words uttered quietly by a small child had catalyzed a transformation, highlighting the profound power of observation and intuition in uncovering truth. By mid-afternoon, The courtroom had reached an unprecedented equilibrium. The combination of Lily's clarity and Rex's trained instincts created a narrative that was coherent, persuasive, and undeniable. Adults who had initially dismissed the child's input now recognized the critical value of her perception. A trial, once expected to follow a routine course, had become a testament to the power of insight, observation, and the extraordinary ways truth can reveal itself when conventional methods are complemented by instinct. The courtroom felt electric with anticipation. The trial, already extraordinary, had reached its decisive moment. Witnesses had testified, lawyers had cross-examined, and the judge had carefully considered every detail. From documents and photographs to the subtle alignment between Lily's observations and Rex's trained behavior. The adult participants were aware that the outcome now hinged on a combination of conventional evidence and extraordinary perception. The courtroom had become a place where instinct and innocence had equal weight to analysis and experience. The jury, previously composed of attentive but conventional decision-makers, now faced a unique challenge. They had listened to testimony, studied evidence, and watched demonstrations from Rex, the K-9 officer, whose behavior had been subtly guided by Officer Daniels. But they also could not ignore the unmistakable observations of a 3-year-old girl, whose clarity had altered the trial's trajectory. Each juror scribbled notes, reflecting on how Lily's simple words, not him, had illuminated, overlooked truths and clarified discrepancies in adult testimony. Sarah adjusted Lily in her lap, whispering softly, "You've been amazing, sweetie." Lily's small hands clutched her bear tightly, eyes fixed on Rex, who remained perfectly composed. She did not fully understand the magnitude of her role, but she sensed the importance of the moment. The courtroom, once a rigid theater of adult procedure, now operated as a delicate interplay of instinct, observation, and insight. The trial's tension had shifted from speculation to verification, from assumption to awareness. The defense attorney rose, summarizing the final arguments with precision. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he began, voice steady and authoritative. "Throughout this trial, a critical observation has emerged, one that no adult witness initially detected. The child's insight, aligned with Rex's trained behavior, has clarified key aspects of the events in question. We ask you to weigh the combined evidence of observation, testimony, and instinct when rendering your verdict." His words carried conviction, the culmination of days of careful presentation and meticulous strategy. The prosecutor stood, acknowledging the unique circumstances. While unconventional, we cannot dismiss the clear alignment of the child's observation with the trained responses of the K-9. This insight has helped clarify details previously in dispute. We ask that the jury consider all evidence with careful attention to these observations. Her tone conveyed respect for the unexpected but undeniable contribution to understanding the events. Adults who had doubted the child's role now understood its critical significance. The judge called the jury to deliberate. They filed out silently, leaving the courtroom in a tense hush. Adults exchanged quiet glances, aware that the verdict would reflect a rare intersection of conventional legal evidence and perceptual clarity. Reporters whispered among themselves, noting the unprecedented impact of a 3-year-old's words and a police dog's trained responses. The courtroom, already transformed, awaited closure. Minutes stretched into hours as the jury deliberated. Within the room, every participant reflected on the extraordinary journey of the trial. Witnesses who had testified days earlier reconsidered their statements. Lawyers recalibrated their understanding of events. And the judge contemplated the implications of integrating instinctive observation with conventional evidence. Sarah held Lily close, sensing that the outcome might vindicate her daughter's unintentional yet pivotal role. Finally, the jury returned. The courtroom rose in unison, anticipation thick in the air. A foreperson approached, hands trembling slightly, and spoke with measured clarity. "We, the jury, have reached a verdict." The judge nodded solemnly. "Please state the verdict." A foreperson took a deep breath. "We find the defendant not guilty of the charges in question." A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Relief and astonishment mingled in equal measure. The defendant exhaled deeply, disbelief and gratitude written across his face. Lawyers nodded quietly, some exchanging knowing smiles. Even the prosecutor allowed a moment of reflection, acknowledging that the truth had prevailed through a combination of evidence, instinct, and observation. The small voice of a child, combined with the precise instincts of a canine, had altered the trajectory of justice. Officer Daniels approached Lily gently, kneeling beside Rex. "Good job, little one," he whispered, patting the dog's head. Lily beamed, clutching her bear and smiling shyly. She did not fully grasp the courtroom's gravity, but she understood her own role. Her clarity, simple yet profound, had contributed to uncovering the truth. The courtroom had witnessed something extraordinary, a demonstration of how perception and instinct, even from unlikely sources, could influence outcomes that adults assumed were solely governed by experience and training. The judge addressed the courtroom, his voice steady but warm. "Today, we have seen an exceptional example of truth emerging through observation, instinct, and unexpected insight. While unconventional, the combined contribution of this child and the canine has clarified matters and guided us toward justice. Let this serve as a reminder that truth can come from the most unexpected sources." His words carried weight, echoing through the room with a sense of finality and acknowledgement. Reporters quickly gathered outside the courtroom, eager to document the remarkable story. Cameras captured Lily and Rex, a symbol of clarity, innocence, and instinct working in harmony. Articles would later describe the extraordinary moment when a 3-year-old girl's 2 words, "not him," had altered the course of a trial. The tale of child, dog, and justice would be recounted far beyond the courthouse walls, inspiring admiration for the power of observation and the unexpected ways truth can reveal itself. The defendant, now free, thanked those who had guided the process. Tears welled in his eyes as he acknowledged the extraordinary circumstances that had led to his exoneration. The courtroom had proven that fairness is not only about evidence and procedure, but also about paying attention to subtle cues, instinctive reactions, and unexpected clarity. Adults left with a renewed appreciation for the layers of perception that influence human understanding and justice. For Lily, the experience would later be a memory of quiet fascination rather than legal strategy. She remembered Rex, the calm dog who had responded to her gestures, and the attention she had received from adults. She held her bear tightly and smiled, unaware of the profound impact her clarity had caused. The world of adults, steeped in procedure and protocol, had been reminded that truth often emerges in the simplest of forms through observation, instinct, and the honesty of a child's perspective. Officer Daniels watched Lily as she left the courtroom with her mother. "Not many can say they helped solve a case at 3 years old," he murmured. Sarah smiled, nodding in quiet pride. The alignment between child and dog had revealed more than evidence. It had revealed a universal truth. Attention, instinct, and perception are invaluable, and sometimes the smallest participants can have the largest impact. The trial's conclusion was celebrated not just for the legal victory, but for the extraordinary way it highlighted the intersection of innocence and instinct. Adults left the courtroom with a sense of humility, acknowledging that knowledge is not always confined to age or experience. In that room, truth had been revealed through collaboration between human, child, and animal, demonstrating that clarity and insight can emerge in the most unexpected ways. As the courthouse emptied, stories spread quickly. Neighbors, reporters, and law enforcement officers recounted the remarkable events. The tale of a 3-year-old girl, a police dog, and 2 words that shifted a trial captured imaginations across the community. People marveled at the power of observation and the role of instinct in justice, reminded that sometimes the simplest gestures reveal the deepest truths. Lily, blissfully unaware of her fame, skipped lightly beside her mother, clutching her bear. Rex walked calmly beside Officer Daniels, his task complete, but his presence still commanding respect. The courtroom had been a stage for an extraordinary partnership, proving that insight transcends age, training, and expectation. What had begun as a simple observation had culminated in justice, wonder, and a story that would be remembered for years to come. And so, the extraordinary trial came to its conclusion. A legal victory, a lesson in perception, and an unforgettable testament to the unexpected power of innocence, instinct, and observation. 2 words, a steadfast dog, and a child's unfiltered clarity had reshaped the course of justice, reminding everyone that sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest truths.